Hi everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits and I am here today to continue our exploration of food coloring Speckles journey. Today we are going to be mixing some food coloring with citric acid powder to see if these DIY sprinkles can be used to create beautiful speckled yarn. Now this technique worked great when we used sugar, but why introduce sugar to the yarn if we can do this with citric acid? That'll be more acid to help dye the fiber, plus then you don't have the sugar to rinse out. So that seems like it could be a win-win. This episode of Dyepot Weekly is sponsored by the viewer Anita. Anita, thank you so much for sponsoring today's video. Now let's go make some sprinkles. In each of these containers, I have just 1 teaspoon of some citric acid powder. This is maybe a little finer milled than some of that sugar that I was using, but in theory should work really nicely. I like mixing acid dye powder with these, so fingers crossed. Today we are going to use the Colorite Performance Food Coloring System. To make a purple, I just added 1 drop of blue. We're going to do 2 drops of pink, 1, 2, and then stir it up. It is pretty globby. I think that I might need to add a little more citric acid to it. It looks very, very blue, but I think this is because we have the acid in here already. This is not very dry. Okay, I'm gonna add a whole other teaspoon. I mean, it's granular. It's just not super dry, and a lot is stuck on the fork prongs. Yeah, so this is looking extremely, extremely blue. Let's try, I think I also wanted to do a teal. So I'm going to do 2 drops of blue and 1 drop of yellow. From trying this with sugar and then looking at things more after, the yellow definitely has a bit of a different texture than a lot of the other colors. I'm going to add that, and I'm going to go ahead and add another. I think when we were dealing with sugar, I did a total of 5 drops in 1 tablespoon of sugar, and so this time we're doing 3 drops in 2 teaspoons, which is like 2/3. Let's see. Oh, I mean, it's not that, it looks a little bit like damp sand, but it's really not that wet. And then for the third color, I just wanted to do a blue. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, and so you have to break up. Okay, I think this one started off working a bit better because it had more powder in there to begin with. Now we've got 3 colors that are all blue based, but I would say these 2, and this is supposed to be our purple, they look different right now. We'll see how they look when we finally add them to yarn, but now I want to give these around 30 minutes to dry out a little bit before we start speckling. Today we are going to dye both Knit Picks Muse and Stroll yarns. Muse is an Aran weight 100% superwash merino yarn, and Stroll is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon. These are both yarn bases I like to use a lot. I haven't used Muse quite as much, but this is what we'll use today. Right now I am pre-soaking 1 of each yarn base in just some plain tap water. Since we have our sprinkles made with citric acid, we might not need acid for this at all. But I think after I speckle and we go to steam set this first batch, then I might soak a second set using some vinegar, so that way we can see if some extra acid already in there makes a difference. But I'm excited. I squeezed out a lot of the water, but I could have squeezed out more. So these skeins are plenty damp to help the citric acid dissolve and go into them. Now, it's been about 20 minutes and we've got our purple, our blue, and our green. Let's start with the purple we mixed because it is looking very blue. But if you remember, oh, this is going pretty well. There's some clumps, but I'm able to get some really discreet and tiny specks on here. All right, but if you remember, there was a dry rub with Wilton's Violet video I did where I mixed acid in with the violet and it turned blue, but then it turned purple again with heat. So we will see what we see from it. Red 3 does not like acid, so going a little heavier. But so far, it's pretty good. Things aren't clumped and I'm getting dye all over my fingers. But yeah, I'm curious if that will end up looking more blue, or sorry, more purple. Right now, where I see it sinking in, I just see blue. I added pink, didn't I? All right, well, let's add the other colors. Eventually, I plan to add all the colors all over. I'm going in with the actual blue this time versus the purple that looks blue. We know from the Summer Mini Skein mini-series that 1 drop of pink and 1 drop of blue is enough to make a purple. It's a bluish purple, but that's why I thought that 2 to 1 would work well. So we'll have to see if there's a color difference, or again, if we won't see a difference until we add heat. So what I'm observing here is that the colors will fall in clumps, but then there are little granules that I'm able to, towards the end when my fingers are more empty, sort of disperse onto our yarn, which I think is really cool. Let's not forget that there is no acid in the yarn at all yet. And I can also say without a shadow of a doubt that my fingers are getting much more pigment on them than when I was using sugar. I will probably swap to wearing gloves in a little bit, but let's add some of this more, I was going for more of a teal, but it's probably going to be just like a really nice green. But I don't have them side by side, so I can't tell you right away which I prefer, if I prefer the citric acid or the sugar. All I can tell you about is how my fingers weren't this dirty with the sugar, but someday, depending on if they seem like they might be equivalent, then maybe we'll do like a side-by-side test. That could be pretty fun. Okay, I'm gonna let everything sit for about 10 minutes now. Look at that purple speckle right over there. I'm seeing some hints of some red maybe in some of these. It is super subtle because these specks are so tiny, but I see it. And you don't see that little bit of red in the little blue specks that are starting to soak in, because the blue is just blue number 1. If I didn't want to give time to allow these sprinkles to sink into the yarn a bit so we can see how it's working, I wouldn't bother waiting 10 minutes. I just flip and add more color to the other side, but I'm hoping that we will learn something through this. I'm not sure if you can really see the little bit of citric acid still there and how it is pink. I think that the red 3 is somehow sticking to the acid almost, because I see that in many of these places, and we're also seeing a little bit more of a pink halo with a purpley blue versus a pinkish purple dot with the blue halo. This is something that we've now seen a few times when it comes to breaking violet. If the acid concentration is low, then you see the pink strike first and then the blue, or you would see the pink with blue surrounding it because that blue spreads out farther because it takes longer to strike. But when we've mixed the violet directly with a lot of acid, it immediately shifts more blue. And so something about that causes it to behave a little differently, and I mean, it's cool. I just don't have a good scientific explanation for you, but this is something that it seems to be the consistent thing for when I observe violet or a purple, because this wasn't technically Wilton's Violet, but it's a similar mixed kind of color. This is behaving differently from when we did Wilton's Violet with sugar sprinkles. And so I think what is going to happen is we're going to have to do a purple DIY sprinkle sort of speckle off. We'll make some, and maybe we'll do this on mini skeins or something, but we'll make some like Colorite purple with citric acid and with sugar, and we'll do the Wilton's Violet icing color with both citric acid and sugar and compare all of them and see what we can see. The speckles that we are seeing with both our more green and other blue look good as well. You know, I have no complaints about either of them, but now we're gonna start speckling all over everything. I put on a single glove to spare my fingers from more staining and added each of the colors all over the whole skein, flipped the yarn, added more all over. The one thing I tried to keep consistent was that if my glove was at all wet, I wanted to wipe it off before going back into the powder. I didn't want to introduce any more liquid or wetness into it, so that way I could try to get as fine speckles as possible. I'm actually pretty satisfied here, so I'm gonna pick this up and we're gonna go steam set it. But these speckles are pretty. It's a little harder to speckle with the glove on just because the powders want to stick to the glove a bit, but I still think that we've got some really pretty colors in here. The counter is a little dirty. It's a little dirty, but we are gonna dye 2 more skeins. And you know what? I'm not gonna soak them, pre-soak them in acid like I originally thought. I'm gonna squeeze out some of the water and lay them directly onto this dirty counter. I already mentioned a few other tests that I want to do with these DIY sprinkles and things. So I'm not going to save these citric acid sprinkles that we created today. Instead, we are going to use them on this yarn. And it doesn't even need to be like as speckles necessarily. I'm dumping clumps onto here. Trying to save some for the other side. But we will be rubbing the counter and getting all of this in that we can. Let's do another green right there. We could do more speckles, but you can see, like, it is easy to separate this stuff, but it is not, it doesn't quite speckle as well as what we see some other things do. So what I'm doing now is adding it on and then spreading it. And we will be rubbing this yarn onto the counter. And so I think the color that is left on my gloves is definitely going to influence these colors that we see on the yarn. I have a feeling even if we get some purples in here that this is going to feel very green. But yeah, I'm just working it in, and we will flip and do this on the other side as well. I'm blanking I don't even remember what video I did this in recently. Oh, I think it was the fluorescent color speckling video. So I did this with acid dye powder mixed with citric acid and really, really liked the effect. And so we'll probably have some speckles, but we'll also have some darker patches of color as well. But the goal is to use up as much of the pigment as we can. And so that is what I am doing. And since these are 2 different yarn bases, it doesn't even matter if they are similar or not, but just trying to be a little similar. And if we really wanted to, I could go through and add liquid to these containers to combine and include on yarn. And well, maybe we will need to do one last, maybe I'll film a leave no dye behind episode with what's left in these. I won't toss it, but I don't know if it'll be a part of this particular video. Okay, and now we are patting this down, and aha, I see a little bit of purplish stuff, but this is fun and random, totally random. I like this a lot, and since there is acid and we're dealing with superwash yarn, things are striking pretty quickly. Then we can wipe up what is left on the counter. And I'm being a little more gentle with the Muse just because it has less protection because it is such a low twist. But I think that these colorways are just as exciting as the other ones that we created. Anita, I have a feeling I'll be sending you one of these two skeins. There's something about them with the like spread and speckles that is so fun. But I guess I need to wait about 20 minutes for my steamer basket to open up, so these will hang out here for now. I'm now going to remove our speckled yarn, and I do see green, blue, and purple speckles in here. I'm going to remove it from the pot to go ahead and cool. And we're going to steam the other yarn in here in a moment. But first, I'm actually going to use the liquid in the pot to film a leave no dye behind, which will come out sometime after this video. This into our steamer basket. We've actually got our leave no dye behind yarn beneath this. And we're going to steam this for 30 minutes. All right. Now let's remove this heavier Randall speckled. Ooh, we do have some purpley blue, some teal, and some more blue. This is really pretty. I'm going to set it aside to cool completely. Let's wash our speckled yarn. Sometimes as the zip ties get old and are exposed to heat a lot, they can stop catching as well. But I am not seeing any bleeding. We can go ahead and add a little bit of soap. But since we use citric acid and not sugar for these, we don't need to worry about having quite as much rinsing. And I will say, we've got some beautiful speckling on here. So anyway, I am going to go rinse out the soap. And check one time, no bleeding. We'll put the yarn through my spin dryer and then hang it up to dry. This worked really well. I mean, I hypothesized that if you could do this with sugar, you could do it with citric acid. And the sugar was a little easier to get a reasonable consistency. But there's no question we got beautiful pigmented speckles with food coloring on the Stroll and the Muse. But today, the magic really came into play for me when we wanted to leave no dye behind, and I went heavy with the citric acid speckles that I made. The fact that we can get speckles this heavy, and this is food coloring, is spectacular to me. I am just in love with this color. I have played with breaking a lot of purple food colorings, and I think that today this is really helping me make a definitive hypothesis in what I observe sometimes when it comes to purples breaking with a little bit of a pink halo or with the blue halo. And I think that it's absolutely acid dependent. If the acid is really high, we might see a more purple halo with pink on the outside. And today, since we mixed the food coloring with citric acid, the acid was really high. But when we did, say, Wilton's Violet with sugar, we got the pinks in the center with the blue halo. So you know I'm gonna need to do a violet versus the Colorite purple thing side by side, sugar versus citric acid, and we'll take a closer look at this. But I really feel that I am finally understanding things, and in many past videos I'm like, this isn't quite what I expected. I don't know why this isn't what I expected. Now, why do we see a pink halo when the pinks usually strike super fast? I have seen that red number 3 will crock, it will break, or not break, I mean crash out of solution under acidic conditions. In older videos, you'll see a pink halo around the edge of a pot. And that's why now I wait until the very last moment to add the food coloring to the acid. But my thought is, if there's acid there, that some of that crocking might happen, some of that crashing might happen, but then maybe when it's less concentrated, it can redissolve and rebind. And that's why we end up with a little bit of the pink halo in this situation. But anyway, that's my hypothesis. We can explore this more in the future. But oh, this violet on the single ply with that pink, this is stunning. I am in love with this more random skein and thinking that we could have bigger patches of colors, but it's just such heavy speckles. Anita, this is absolutely my favorite today, and this is the skein that I will be sending you. You know, the only complaint I really have about Muse as a yarn base is that the sock version of this yarn, which is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon. This skein is just 100% superwash merino. The sock one isn't single ply. I would have loved if it was a single ply 75-25 sock yarn, but it's 4 ply, just like Stroll and Felici. And so the sock version of Muse isn't my favorite, but the worsted weight, the Aran weight, is phenomenal. Anita, thank you so much for sponsoring this episode of Dyepot Weekly. I think we learned so much in this video, and I am so excited with how it turned out and really, really hope you enjoy your yarn. But man, when it comes to making your own speckles with food coloring, it is way easier than the old ways I used to do it. Whether you use sugar or citric acid powder, there are plenty of options. And I am really excited to explore things more in the future. I know some people have asked me about using salt. One reason that I'm really hesitant about salt is that I haven't explored its effects when it comes to yarn dyeing. Some salts are used as a leveling agent to slow down the rates that colors absorb so you can get more even color coverage. I'm not sure about table salt and its effect there, but it's just something that's sort of in my head. And salt was my least favorite to speckle with when I first tried mixing acid dye powder with salt, sugar, and citric acid. So that's another little bias that I have, but there's no reason not to try it. Is to get some sugar that is coarser milled than the sugar that I used in my videos. And that's something that I would love to explore as well. However, I think that there is a huge benefit to playing with these techniques using materials that are very easily accessible for people. Most people probably have some white sugar in their home already. And so that's one reason why I went for that first instead of going straight to citric acid. But I mean, which would you pick, sugar or citric acid? Let me know down in the comments. I think it really would only make a difference when it comes to some colors that break. And so maybe we need to do more than just purple and side-by-side experiments in the future. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I'm sure you're already subscribed, but if you're not, what are you waiting for? Please subscribe, have your notifications turned on, and while you're at it, give this video a like. All these things are the best way that you can help support the content here on the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel. But if you'd like to go and support us in some other ways, I do have an Etsy shop. Almost all the yarn that comes through these videos goes into the shop, and it's a really great way to get some beautiful hand-dyed yarn and support the content that you enjoy at the same time. Oh guys, I keep staring at these colors and have to keep reminding myself that I did this with food coloring, because looking at them, you know, I'm thinking of various acid dyes, and I am so excited by these colors. Thank you so much for watching, everyone.